is this. These common challenges are opportunities. These common challenges we are facing basically are clarifying our common interest and will work for us as a boost and motivations to strengthen our relation. For us, the role of the West does not need to be in decline. Our idea is that there is many reasons to think that working together we can find a new impetus for our relations, in fact a new renaissance. Now to agree or to oppose this argumentation, we have a very high-level panel which will be introduced by our Deputy Director of Mate Center, Roland Freudenstein. Apart from that, we have a very high-level audience, which is you. Especially I would like to welcome our transatlantic friends, all participants of our 5th Transatlantic Think Tank Conference. And especially our friends from International Republican Institute, long-term friends and cooperation, and the Hudson Institute, who will become our long-term friends in the near future. With these words, I would like to give a floor to our keynote speaker, Ambassador Mark Green, the President of India, who, among many positions held, has been ambassador of Tanzania, representing the United States, and also has served 4 terms in the House of Representatives in the United States. Ambassador Green, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tomi. Mr. Prime Minister, Mr. Secretary General, Mr. Ambassador, honored guests, ladies and gentlemen, could go on and on and on with the wonderful folks that I see here tonight. Let me just say good evening, one and all. I'm delighted to help kick off this public session of the 5th Transatlantic Think Tank Conference, and I'm proud that the International Republican Institute is joining with America's Hudson Institute, and of course Europe's Wilfried Martin Center for European Studies, in co-sponsoring this important series, and I welcome you here tonight on behalf of all organizations. IRI is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization. Our mission is to encourage democracy in places where it is absent, to help democracy become more effective where it's in danger, and to share best practices where democracy is flourishing. As you know, I am the new face here at the conference, having been IRI president for less than a year. Despite my short tenure, I must say that I feel very much at home here, and I want to thank all of you for that. I was with you in March in Dublin for the EPP Congress, where I had the chance to meet many of you for the first time and to join in the events organized by the Martin Center. In October, you kindly invited me to moderate a panel at the Economic Ideas Forum in Mikolas's favorite city, Bratislava, and then went on to watch the European Parliament at work in Strasbourg. In November, in Washington, IRI co-hosted the first Transatlantic Youth Forum with the leadership of the youth of the EPP. And in the meantime, I've had the chance to meet many of you face-to-face, meet many EPP member party leaders here in Europe and in Washington. So again, I'd like to begin by thanking all of you for welcoming me so quickly and so heartily into the world of the European Center Right. For IRI and for me personally, the relationships that we're building at conferences like this has never been more important than it is right now. And as Tomi referenced, I think the title of this seminar captures it well. It calls on us in the West to rise to the challenge. Perhaps it should read challenges, plural, because the emerging challenges to the Western idea, to the idea of Europe whole and free, are many. To the East, of course, the most obvious challenge comes from the newly adventurous and newly reckless Russia. Moscow has illegally annexed Crimea and invaded eastern Ukraine, laying down a challenge to the entire post-Cold War architecture here in Europe. And somehow hoping that free nations won't notice, Russia is doing everything it can to block countries like Moldova and Georgia from pursuing their own path toward Europe. It's even trying to rattle the countries of the Western Balkans. It seems to me that the lesson of all this is rather clear. It is not enough for Mr. Putin that he is throttling freedom and democracy on his own people. He wants to make sure that, as the saying goes, misery enjoys company. To the south, democracy's dashed hopes in Egypt and elsewhere put even more pressure on the West, and in particular the EU, as people attempt to escape the turmoil and seek a better life here in Europe. In the Americas, of course, we have felt similar pressures, as many have sought to flee instability, poverty, and oppression in some of the nations in our southern neighborhood. But let's be clear. These are challenging times, but these are not dark times. This is not the first time that freedom has been under threat. This is not the first time that the community of democracies have faced challenges, overt and covert. As we all know, 2014 has been the year of notable anniversaries. 25 years ago, on November 17, students took to the streets of Prague, triggering mass demonstrations that brought down the communist regime in Czechoslovakia, as the Czech Republic was then known, and the Velvet Revolution was underway. Václav Havel, God rest his soul, who played such a key role, would say later on, "It all happened so suddenly that I did not even have time to properly consider whether or not I was up to the task." Thank goodness he was. 25 years ago saw the fall of the Berlin Wall. It's funny that these days, when we look back on such days with almost nostalgia, almost a fog of the passage of time, we somehow assume that it was easy. We somehow assume that the fall of the wall was inevitable. A few years back, Helmut Kohl, when he won the Kissinger Award, put it this way: "But let me remind you that if back in the fall of 1989, in the old Federal Republic of Germany, we had put it to a vote, I am not at all certain that we would have had a majority in favor." Ladies and gentlemen, it took leadership. It took leadership. Just a few years before that, Kohl had made his feelings very clear. He addressed lawmakers in the Bundestag, and he said, "We are not wanderers between East and West. There is no middle way between democracy and dictatorship. We stand on the side of freedom." 25 years ago, a new American president, though hardly new to foreign relations, offered support to leaders like Kohl and Havel and Gorbachev. He traveled to Germany, and despite misgivings from his own staff, opposition from some of his allies, he made his support clear and unmistakable. George Bush, the father, as you call him here, said, "Decade after decade, time after time, the flowering human spirit withered from the chill of conflict and oppression, and again the world waited. But the passion for freedom cannot be denied forever. The world has waited long enough. The time is right. Let Europe be whole and free." And yet on another anniversary, 1 year ago, in Ukraine, President Viktor Yanukovych suddenly reversed his negotiations with the EU in favor of Moscow's customs union. His announcement not only broke word with the masses of Ukrainians going to work each and every day, hoping to become part of the community of democracies, but he broke faith with a young generation of Ukrainians who demanded the right to pursue and to shape their own future. Yanukovych was ready to condemn that generation to years of corruption, authoritarianism, state control, and direction from Moscow. But tens of thousands of young people had another idea, and they took to the streets and they took over the Maidan. They erected tents and barricades. Old men, many retired from the military, and young men, unemployed, came together on the streets. Women, a brigade of women in the Ukrainian self-defense forces, other women heading to those tents to cook, to try to keep the protesters warm and fed. Homemade catapults, wooden shields, they stood there in the bitter cold, protesting what Yanukovych had done. And then, of course, Yanukovych's snipers opened fire. Lives were lost, but Yanukovych and Moscow lost the debate. Of course, the story of Ukraine's liberation doesn't end there. Unlike Gorbachev, who knew that freedom must prevail in the long run, President Putin is in denial. He will wreck his economy. He will shut down Russia's own democratic voices, invading overtly countries like Ukraine and invading covertly others. Sometimes I'm asked, given what's happening, why is the whole world not up in arms? Some would say it's because not everyone in the world is looking for democracy to succeed. The late Daniel Patrick Moynihan of New York, senator, UN ambassador, used to say, and I'm quoting, "Every day we are assailed because we are a democracy. Nothing so unites the dictatorships as the conviction that their success ultimately depends upon our failure." It reminds me of what Ronald Reagan warned us all of in the speech that he gave in the early 80s, the one that led to the creation of the National Endowment for Democracy and organizations like IRI. He warned us, we have not inherited an easy world. Reminds me of what my mother, who grew up in London during World War II, says every time I talk about the challenges that we're all facing. She puts down her cup of tea and says, well, you know, if it was easy, then anyone could do it. That's why you're there. And I would argue that's why we're here, why we're gathered at this conference. No, it isn't easy, but it's something that we must do. On this year of democracy's anniversaries, we need to live up to the promise and the potential of the generation of leaders who have come before: Kohl, Havel, Reagan, Thatcher, Bush, Wallace, so many. In my brief time at IRI, as I've been baptized in the family of the European Center Right, I have seen with my own eyes what can be accomplished if we work together closely for freedom. Ukraine, Tunisia, elsewhere, real successes. On behalf of IRI and on behalf of Americans, I want to thank so many of you who are here today and the institutions that you represent. You have been great partners in the name of democracy. In that speech, Ronald Reagan said, democracy is not at all a fragile flower. Well, together, you and I, and the institutions we represent, we have been planting seeds, pulling out weeds, helping to gently nurture that flower. This conference is a sign that we are all ready for more. At IRI, we want to partner with nations and peoples pledging themselves to Europe and to democracy. We want to work with all of you to push back against backsliding democracy. Military leaders in modern times like to talk about a military surge. We should come together for a democracy surge, one that can help people seeking freedom, people seeking democracy, helping them to pursue their own future as they see it. We can provide tools. We can provide assistance. Some of you listened to Elmar Brock speak last night, and I thought his words were moving and wise. And he spoke briefly about the honor that he had earlier this year to present an award to former President H.W. Bush. I myself, earlier this year, had an honor to present IRI's highest honor, the Freedom Award, to President Bush. And I had the chance to travel up to Kennebunkport with General Scowcroft to give him the award. First thing he said to me as I looked around the walls of Kennebunkport and saw photo after photo of those great times of world leaders, he said to me, "I don't know what I've done to deserve this." And I said, "Mr. President, don't worry about it. We'll make something up." But something else that Barbara Bush said to me, I have taken away as perhaps the most important lesson of all. She said, "Mark, you know, when George was president, he would call a world leader every day for no reason. He would call to check in. And his belief very firmly was that you have to have friendships, you have to have conversations, that if you don't have discussions when crises are not at hand, it weakens your hand when crises are there. The first conversation cannot be an ask. It must not be a request." And that's what I heard from Elmar last night. All of us here in this room, in the institutions that we represent, we need to have those daily conversations. We need to talk about what we see before us, the places we come from, the places we work. Increase the understanding. Make sure the conversation flows. And if we do that, and we build those personal relationships, when the moments of need come, and they will come, we will be better prepared, we will be stronger, and we will be unified in the name of democracy, and the West will rise to the challenges. Thank you.
Next. I mean, if it wasn't a movie title, I would say he has a French connection. That's already taken. Okay, and then last but by no means least, on my left, Ambassador João Valle de Almeida, who was, his last post until a few months ago, was the head of delegation of the European Union to the United States in Washington. Before that, he was head of cabinet to the then Commission President José Manuel Durão Barroso. And if the Brussels grapevine is right, I think he's going to New York to be the head of delegation of the European Union to the United Nations. Sorry if I gave away too much info here, but well. And he's also an avid handball player. So here we have he used to be, right, different kinds of sports that may actually be helpful in politics and administration. Right. Now, before we start, just two other brief remarks. We have live streaming here, so this is on the record. There are no Chatham House rules in this session. Live streaming on www.martenscenter.eu, and the hashtag, and you're very much invited to make use of it and to tweet. So our hashtag is #TTTC14, Transatlantic Think Tank Conference 14. So, having said all this, I like cold showers. So, sometimes before I get carried away with confidence in the future of the West, which I very much have, I try to see things from a completely different point of view. So, this morning, I watched BBC World News, and I tried to watch them with non-Western eyes. Now, what were the prime topics in the BBC News? Another African American killed by a white policeman in the United States. Another anniversary, additional to the ones we heard, 30 years of the catastrophe of Bhopal in India, caused by a Western company, Union Carbide. And last but by no means least, the ISIS is establishing a franchise, a training camp in eastern Libya, a country that has been liberated 3 years ago by NATO forces, Europe and America together. So what do we have to be proud of? Mikuláš Dzurinda, floor is yours.
I believe that there are many reasons thanks to which we can be proud and hopeful looking at the future, first of all. Despite the fact that sometimes I feel frustration as well, having a feeling that we are not strong enough to face challenges which are coming. I think looking at the past, but also looking at the recent situation, the present time, I believe that the West has still a lot to offer to people, to our citizens, but also to people out of our community. I believe that we have a good future, especially when we are strong enough. What does it mean to be strong enough? We are strong enough, first of all, if we are able to defend the interests of our people. If we are able to modernize our societies, our economies, to create new jobs, especially for young people. If we are able to bring security, to fight terrorists, to manage illegal immigration, and to solve everyday problems, difficulties, and challenges. But I think that it is very natural in every family, in every society, that sometimes we are more successful, sometimes we are not winning. But I believe that we are able to offer the future for the people. Looking at the future and listening President Green and his speech, I was thinking about the past and about the last few decades. His speech reminded me time when I lived behind the Iron Curtain, being the citizen of the second class, refusing communist membership. I felt that not everything is perfect in the West. Maybe I felt it more instinctively, that not everything is perfect. But on the other side, the space for everyday life is much, much better than in my case. And I remember very well how keen I was to listen something positive from the side of the West, how angry I expected some positive signals to us. Mark mentioned several personalities, great politicians. I will remember forever the meeting of two presidents mentioned by you, Gorbachev and Ronald Reagan in Reykjavik. If I'm not mistaken, it was in 1986. I will remember forever this disarming smile of President Reagan, which properly indicated who is going to win the Cold War. For me, with young family, with two small children, it was immensely, incredibly strong signal and encouragement that the US and the West didn't George Bush Sr. described his vision to make Europe whole and free. It was also very strong encouragement that the West is counting on us as well. And now I feel that this is again our obligation to show people, especially in our neighborhood, that there is something like a light at the end of the tunnel. I am thinking about people in the Balkans, but also in the East, especially in Ukraine. They are watching, they are listening, they are keen to listen something positive. So I believe that we can serve as a light at the end of the tunnel, but only in the case when we are able to be strong enough and being able to avoid some pitfalls or traps, like tendency to populism, for instance. I'm a little bit disturbing how hugely we tend to populism. And populism leads to xenophobia and at the end of the day to primitive anti-Americanism, which is rising and which is disturbing. So we should not only think and speak, but also to take the action how to be stronger tomorrow than we are today. In this case, we will be attractive. People will strive for EU, NATO membership, and this is also in our interest. The broader is the spectrum or the land of stability, the better also for them, but also for us.
Thank you very much. Ken Weinstein, I would like to turn to you now. Well, how does this look with American eyes now? Is the West in decline from your point of view, or do we have the light at the end of the tunnel to show to the rest of the world?
First of all, let me thank you. Let me thank our friends here at the Martin Center, and also our friends from IRI. The last 2 days, yesterday, today, we've had 2 days of terrific conversations, frank, very useful, and also very inspiring. Hearing Elmar Brok last night talk about Ronald Reagan, talk about George Bush, hearing President Zorinda here, hearing President Green mention it as well. It reminds us of what the key job of the American president is, which is something our last 3 presidents to some degree have forgotten. We elected 3 domestic policy presidents in a row. People who came into the office really not prepared for the primary job of the American president, which is to provide strong and engaged international leadership in partnership with our allies. And as a result, we as here in Europe, we became too inward-looking, and to some degree, as a result, we have stepping back from the role of world leader and the conscious decision made by President Obama to reduce the American footprint around the world has in part exacerbated an arc of crisis all the way around the world, whether it be in the Sunni world from Pakistan to the Maghreb, Turkey, ISIS, etc., whether it be the threat of the Iranian nuclear program, which is a threat not just to Israel, to the Gulf, major threat of future proliferation, obviously the challenge of a resurgent Russia, the challenge of increasingly assertive China, China and Russia working together. You look at the immense complexities of the international situation today, the number of simultaneous challenges we face, each of which would have required defense planners, leaders to work on each of these crises alone. It would have taken a significant effort. And today we need to face all of these things together simultaneously and to work together to restore the kind of partnership, the kind of leadership that can take the kind of proactive efforts to prevent these crises going forward. So from Washington, I would say that the American public showed in the last election a real awareness of the fact that there is a crisis of international leadership coming from the United States. It was a key issue in the congressional elections, which was a surprise since these kind of elections normally turn primarily on domestic issues. And the question then becomes, what needs to be done? And I think there's an emerging consensus in Washington on this, that there's a sense that President George W. Bush had noble intentions. In some ways, with his democracy agenda, he overshot in some ways what could be realistically achieved, but though he had noble purposes, he frankly was not terribly good always at communicating with our allies, whether it be his decision about the Kyoto Treaty to key aspects of the war in Iraq. And there's a sense that President Obama came in with the belief that his election alone would sort of change international affairs, would change the Muslim world, and would restore strong relations, significantly improved relations with Europe. And instead, what we've seen internally in the White House, and there's an increasing awareness of this, that the president has built a policy apparatus that not only excludes allies who were not consulted during the 93-day decision over Afghanistan in 2009, significant U-turns with regard to attacking chemical weapons sites in Syria, where our allies in France were ready to launch an attack and were not told by the president that he had decided to ask for congressional approval after assuring everybody that he wasn't going to just 24 hours earlier, to running the Iranian nuclear negotiations, which were supposed to be a multilateral negotiation, into a U.S.-Iran kind of direct negotiation, also upsetting our allies in Europe, particularly the French and others who put in place tough sanctions. And so there's a recognition now that we need to sort of rethink the way that our American foreign policy, we can't overshoot, we can't undershoot, and we need to focus on the arc of crisis that's critical. We also are coming to an understanding that we need to also rebuild a strategic culture in Washington. We have, for far too long, and I think this current administration is a real proof of it, we've had a tendency to deal with our strategic competitors and our enemies when crises arise, trying to negotiate through these crises, trying to offer them reassurances, acting as if the crises are results of misunderstandings, misperceptions. And in fact, as we know, our enemies look at Russia, you look at Iran, you look at ISIS. It's not a result of a misunderstanding that they're acting because they detest the West, they detest Western freedom. Certainly they try to take advantage of Western freedom through our media to spread disinformation, to spread lies, but they fundamentally reject the liberal democratic idea. And we need to, in rebuilding this strategic culture, to deal with threats that run from cyber to terrorism to nuclear proliferation to major naval challenges that we're having with the rise of the Chinese Navy. And I was just in Tokyo Monday and Tuesday of this week, and many of the same concerns we're hearing in Europe are being voiced by our Japanese allies, who are quite worried about a lack of strength in the so-called pivot to Asia, we're hearing the same kinds of concerns. So there's a need to rebuild a real strategic culture, and there's also a need for us to really fight and reclaim the truth. When the Russians are spreading disinformation, we need to be out there. We need to be aggressively challenging them to stand up for the truth. As people who President Zorinda knows from his days behind the Iron Curtain, remember what it was like to have Western leaders say, to call out leaders when they lie, when their media services spread disinformation. We need to do all this, do it much more effectively. The good news is I think that we are now in Washington. Rand Paul, the libertarian, recognizes he's not running as libertarian for president on the foreign policy side anymore, because I think there's a broad consensus that there's a need for America to re-engage with our allies, and delighted with Hudson Institute to be taking part in this process here, and look forward to a very interesting conversation.
Well, thanks very much, Ken. Excellent remarks. Now, João, the issue of burden sharing is one of the constant topics between Europeans and Americans. I'm sure you've also come across that topic in your activity. So is Europe actually doing its job in this alliance, facing these challenges that are coming up these days?
Well, first of all, thank you very much. I just returned from Washington 3 weeks ago, and this is my first public event. I was not planning to be too visible or too active in this particular period, but I was stimulated by the title of this conference. But let's be very frank. I mean, imagine yourselves 6 months ago, or a year ago, or maybe less than that. You would not find a conference with a title with the word West. The word West, and whatever lies behind that word, has somehow vanished from our lexicon in the last few years. It came back. So there are good reasons for us to think why it came back, but also what it means. And just a parenthesis, I'll be speaking entirely on a personal basis here today. So what is West? I mean, it's certainly not a scientifically solid concept. Because we could consider that Australia is part of the West, or even Japan is part of the West. So it certainly does not have a geographically solid basis to stand upon. And some people outside this room, in other circles, and I've met some in the US as well, would even challenge the use of this word. They say it's Cold War speak, it's old-fashioned, younger people don't relate to it. But I actually think it makes some sense, and that's why I accepted this invitation, and I'm very glad to be here, because I think we need, in this political environment of the organizers of this conference, and in other political environments, we should go back to think about this. So what lies behind this nice word? Like the Prime Minister said, you need to try something else to really see how good is what you have. I happen to live 17 years of my life, the first 17 years of my life, under a dictatorship back in Portugal, which is my home country. It was not behind the Iron Curtain, of course, but it was behind another curtain of a right-wing dictatorship. No freedom, no democracy, no respect for human rights, no individual rights being protected. So I know what it is, something different from what we have in the West. So let's concentrate on that. The West is a word that stands for democracy, freedom, individual rights, collective rights, human rights, rule of law, market economies, open societies, and a lot more. And this is what we're talking about here. And this is what we should reflect upon in a world that has become more complex, sometimes more unpredictable than the one we had during the Cold War, where we knew the enemy, we knew what we were standing for and what the other side wanted. And today we have a much more complex environment. I mean, most of our enemies are not visible. some of our enemies are non-state actors. It's much more difficult to, explain to our constituencies, to our kids, to our, hopefully for me soon, grandkids, what it is about. So in this complex environment in which we live, I think it makes sense to go back to what lies behind the word West. And whatever we conclude as being the scientific definition of West, one thing is for sure. Europe and the US are part of it. Europe and the US are even more than part of it. Europe and the US are the heart of the West. So if we want to think about the West, if we want to make sure that the West moves forward in the right direction, that in the balance of things we are moving forward, we are basically and first and foremost talking about what we can do between Europe and America. Well, that was my job in the last 4 years, and during the discussion we may come back to that. My second point will be that I don't buy the decline narrative. I hardly use that word and certainly do not associate it with the word West, because I don't think the West is in decline. There is a rebalancing in the world. There is a quantitative rebalancing in the world. There is more growth being produced in Asia-Pacific region than in the past. There is, in some areas of the Atlantic region, less growth being produced and less jobs being created than in the past. And certainly in relative terms, there is a shift, a quantitative shift around the world. But at the same time, this process, largely called globalization, as we all know, lifted millions of people, hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. It has created a new middle class in many parts of the world. What is the aspiration of this new middle class? I don't want to be too simplistic about it, but basically, the aspiration of this middle class, everywhere you turn to in the world, is to become closer to what our middle class has already achieved and obtained. And isn't this what we've been fighting for, struggling for, and trying to produce around the world? If I look at the European Union, we have been promoting our model as one that could be used by others around the world. We have been putting loads of money on development aid exactly to bring these countries up to a higher standard of quality of life. And when I often use this example, when you give a new member of the middle class the opportunity to buy something, maybe the first thing they will buy is one TV set. The second thing will be a second TV set for the kids or the grandmother or whatever. The third thing they would want is to decide on their own what they watch on the TV set. And this is the kind of, I'm being a little bit simple or even simplistic, but basically what we're talking about here is a process, a gradual process of economic uplifting of many countries around the world, which will inevitably, I believe, be associated with a progress towards better quality of governance, better quality of government, better democracy, increased freedoms. And again, this is what we've been fighting for. My generation fought for it in the Portuguese Revolution in 1974. Earlier than me, those who were in other fights before that were fighting for that. This is what Prime Minister fought for. And so, is this decline of the West? I mean, if this is the decline of the West, long live the decline of the West. I don't see any other alternative system. And again, by the West, I go back to my initial broad definition of West is, I don't see around the world anything that looks more promising, more attractive, and certainly I don't see any model that is attracting so many support and people wanting to get there. So I think we should put this idea of decline out of the picture. We should concentrate on rebalancing, quantitative shifting, and certainly many challenges to our societies. I don't deny that. But I don't align with the gloomy appreciation of what we have today.
Thank you very much. Mark Green, let me just briefly ask you whether you would like to pick up one of these points. And if you don't want to pick up a point of our fellow panelists, I would like to dish on the burden sharing question to you.
Which I didn't reply.
That's okay. There are other takers.
So I will take the burden sharing question.
Yeah. Is Europe doing its job?
It reminds me, in one of my past lives, I was ambassador to Tanzania, U.S. ambassador to Tanzania. And we had something in Dar es Salaam called the Donor Partner Group. And that was the community of governments represented there that were trying to assist the Tanzanians in taking on the challenges of poverty, global health, some governance issues. And we would get together routinely to talk about the way forward to helping provide these tools. And we would have conversations. I'm just sort of saying hypothetically, I would get a phone call from my counterpart from the British, and he would say, you know, I can't work on this, I don't have funds for it, but perhaps you do. And tell her, if you work on this, I'm going to work on this. And so we had communications, frank communications all the time, about the different roles that we could play, given our capacities, and given what our own government supported and what our people supported. And I always felt that those open conversations, and sometimes they were discussions with a little bit of edge, they were productive. We always got to the right place. I don't think it's a bad thing when the West, using that term, when we get together and have conversations, and sometimes there are slight arguments about the different capacities. The fact that we as friends, not just partners, not just allies, but friends, are willing to have frank discussions about how we help lift lives and build communities in other parts of the world, bring it on. That's a very good thing. I think we should have that discussion. I don't think we should be afraid to, on occasion, disagree. Again, amongst friends, that's a good thing. We're all seeking to pull in the same direction.
It's been a long-standing thesis of the Martin Center also that, you know, the thing that is maybe lacking is mutual respect and recognition for what we're good at. We're good at different things between Europe and America. And, you know, instead of despising the other side for their capacities, we should actually take the contrary view. Okay, I would like to open this up now to the floor. I have Karel Kovanda, who already volunteered. Let me see some other hands, if there are. Yes, sir. Okay, Karel, why don't you take the mic that is being offered here and ask your question.
Thank you very much. My name is Karel Kovanda. I'm a retired Czechoslovak, Czech and European senior diplomat. And Roland, we are all familiar with the concept of the black swan, events which are very, very improbable, but when they do occur, they have tremendous impact. Could I, through you, invite your panelists to let their imagination run rampant and tell us what black swan they could see in the foreseeable future possibly happening of a challenge to which we ought to rise?
Sure, thank you. My name is Henrik Bourgeois. I work for General Electric. Thank you first of all, for your comments and your thoughts. You know, the question I wanted to ask you is the following, perhaps to the Ambassador Almeida. You were speaking about very important values and very important ideas, which I think the vast majority of the audience would agree with. The question I was asking myself is, how do you make all of this concrete? And one question I had is that, as you know, we're in the middle of negotiating a Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership Agreement, which is all about increasing trade, but has also a number of important geopolitical implications. And I'm struck by my perceived lack of enthusiasm for this initiative, particularly given the threats that you were alluding to in the panel. And so I think it's it's an initiative that holds a lot of promises and can, go a long way in addressing some of those threats that you were referring to. And so my question is really, do you agree with my perception of lack of enthusiasm on both sides of the Atlantic for this initiative? And if so, what is the cause of it? Or is my perception a wrong perception? Is there actually much more enthusiasm for it than what I perceive to be the case? Thank you.
You? Anybody else who would like to come in at this point? Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Raja Singh. I'm from the Parliament magazine. You spoke about values and exporting values. How did you manage not to export values to the Arab Spring, considering it's been such a failure? And also, with China growing more and more powerful and seen as an economic model for so many third world countries, especially in Africa and Asia, how is the West going to compete against that?
All right. Well, let's have a round of answers then, starting with Ambassador Macri.
Black swans. So what is the challenge that worries me the most? The challenge that worries me the most right now is looking south. On the African continent, and I'm largely an Africanist by training, the median age of an African is 19. The median age of an African head of state is 62. The population of Uganda is the youngest in the world. 15 is the median age. And so I see on the African continent a country or a continent of enormous potential, but a rapidly growing youth bulge. And I think the question for all of us who care so much about freedom and democracy and those values, we have to have a discussion about ways to try to ensure that that rising generation of young people are inside the tent. Part of a constructive dialogue about their future, about economics, about their voice in governing. And I'm afraid that if all of us, including African leaders, of course, leading the charge, fail, that's a problem. And that will continue to be a problem. On TTIP, I am cautiously optimistic. I think the elections that occurred recently in the United States enhance, certainly on the American side of the Atlantic, the prospects for TTIP. And we'll see when the new Congress is elected, but I think it is fair to say that Republicans are a little more enthusiastic about TTIP, perhaps, than the previous majority, at least in the Senate. And so let's hope and let's watch. With respect to the Arab Spring, certainly there have been disappointments. But let's also not forget some of the successes. I was an observer at the first round in Tunisia, and I think Tunisia's ability to stage 3 elections in less than 2 months with voices outside their borders of extremism, I think they are to be commended. The hard work begins after the last round of elections, no doubt, and there certainly is a country with a youth challenge, but I think that there is reason for hope. And with respect to China, I would simply say we must remember, while China is growing, we must remember where it comes from. China has profound challenges that I know its leaders are trying to deal with, and they must deal with. Given the economic model in China versus the economic model of the West, I know which one I would bet upon.
Thank you. João, would you like to? What's your black swan then?
Well, I have a number of black swans.
Pick one.
It's difficult to choose. No, I would say introspection, Western introspection, is what I fear the most. And introspection towards internal domestic threats and external ones. On the domestic side, I would say basically we cannot allow populists to set the agenda. We cannot allow populists to move the political discourse to their side. And the reaction to populism cannot be, let's adapt to what they want to have as an agenda. I think we can do better than that. And I think this applies to some extent to both sides of the Atlantic, if I may, again on a very totally personal basis, to say this. This is introspection against internal threats. As far as external threats is concerned, I think the ambassador is right. And we in Europe are particularly badly placed as far as that is concerned. And that is the pressure of countries that are aspiring, and populations, and particularly young populations, that aspire to better quality of life. And they are not getting a reply in their own countries. This is about our certain close and not so close neighborhood. If we introspect and ignore this reality, and erecting barriers to immigration has never been a reply to these kind of problems, this could become seriously a black swan that will haunt us in the future. As far as TTIP is concerned, and Hendrik has been a great supporter of TTIP, and AmCham, which he presides still or presided before or whatever, and his company, General Electric, they've been great supporters of TTIP. So I've been involved in TTIP too long to be objective about it, but I have no doubts in saying that this has the potential to be the biggest transatlantic project in many years, and I don't want to compare with other previous projects. And I want to say very clearly to all our friends here, Americans and Europeans, this can go seriously right, but it can also go seriously wrong. And if it goes wrong, there'll be a high price to pay. The cost of non-TTIP, economically, but also geostrategically, is huge. So before we disregard TTIP as saying, do we really need that, or can't we live without that, let's, for the sake of reasoning, consider the cost of non-TTIP. How many people would not drink a number of exotic drinks on the failure of TTIP? A failure of TTIP will be a confirmation for many outside Europe and the US that the old guys are no longer capable of getting their act together. They are not even capable of agreeing on a free trade area. They are not capable of, putting aside some, respectable but not so important interests and concerns in favor of a far-reaching strategic goal of not only setting a free trade area, but at taking the leadership in the way we all organize the global economy. So TTIP is extremely important, extremely crucial, economically, regulatory-wise. How do we have power today in the world? You cannot consider power as being simply military power, or the number of divisions or tanks that you have, like in the old days. That's no longer the measure of power. The measure of power is a combination of a number of factors, of which the economic ones, but also the regulatory ones, are becoming even more important as the economy integrates and globalizes even further. So disregarding TTIP as a non-strategic, non-crucial issue and a technical one, too difficult to agree, is a serious mistake. Maybe another black swan. So my call on all of you, Americans and Europeans, and I know that in some of the discussions, some people said, well, that's not really important. It's important because of the example it sets, or the non-example it sets. It's important because of what it means in economic terms. We need new sources of growth. Our economies are old, are aged, are underperforming. I accept Europe more than the US, but still the US is not yet at where it wants to be. And we need to find sources of growth that don't add to the deficit, that don't add to the debt. None of us wants to add anything to the deficit and to the debt. And I'm talking to many Republicans here. I know the debates in the US and the positions you took. So this is one good way of doing And for Europe and European debate, which is a very difficult one, and I reply more directly to Hendrik's question, what we need is political awareness, political will from all of us and people even more important than us in our political systems, but also in the business circles, to look at TTIP and say, listen, we cannot miss this thing. We cannot miss this opportunity. We cannot fail on the aspirations and the opportunities that are behind here. So it's economic, it's regulatory, but it's also geopolitical. A word on the Arab Spring and China. If there's something that defines Europe, and I would say defines the West, is that we are not perfect, and we don't claim to be perfect. And of course, we made a number of mistakes in a number of areas, and we missed opportunities in a number of areas. And our neighborhood policy has been put in question, ours and yours, has been put in question in many areas, and the Arab Spring raised a number of points. There were good discussions in Europe around this, and I think we should continue. As I said, neighborhood should be a priority, and the new leadership in Europe has already given clear evidence of that. On China, I agree with Ambassador Green. Some people sometimes underestimate the challenges China is facing. I mean, I would even say, for the sake of the discussion, that China has bigger challenges than the West to face. And the consequences of these challenges, or not meeting these challenges, will be huge for the Chinese society and the Chinese economy, repercussions for us as well. So I wouldn't buy this idea that China is moving on the right path towards glory and the West is moving on the right path towards decline. None of this is true, and the situation in China is certainly more complex. As far as Africa is concerned, this is one of my concerns, is the influence that China is acquiring in the developing world, be it Africa, Asia, or Latin America. And I'm been fighting myself modestly towards increased cooperation between the EU and the US. And we've done some good things in terms of development policy and the way we deal with this country.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let me just move on to the other side of the panel.
Well, if I'm thinking about main worries, which are more in my head sometimes, I would go back to populism again. Because by my mind, populism leads not only to anti-Americanism, which was mentioned before, but this populism leads also to collaboration with evil. If someone annexes a piece of land of the neighbor, he or she or it is evil. And now I am not very happy to notice that there are some leaders in Europe who are very friendly towards Mr. Putin. From one side, it was very nice to listen Mark Green, that we are friends, we are allies, but we are mainly friends. And among friends, sometimes we can see the same thing differently. Kosovo, we are not united, being provocative a little bit, but the goal is the same. I spoke many, many times with people from both camps, from the camp of Republicans, but also with Hillary, that what is the goal? The goal is not to push Serbia to the hands of Russia, being very, very, very clear. The other way around, the goal is to modernize the Balkans and to contribute to the stability and the future of these nations. So it was only maybe a small illustration. But in the principal issues, we should stay together. We should stick to the principles. And now I feel very strongly that we have to be united in Transatlantic, but also in both pillars, in the US, but also in Europe. We should not collaborate with evil. This is the experience of my life. And we should be very, very careful because of it. The second worry in my head is my hesitation whether we are able to invest into our security and defense enough. And we are again in the area of populism. When I listen my prime minister in Slovakia, I am very unhappy. Because to invest into defense and security, it means to invest to our military forces, to make them more flexible. It means to modernize our arms. But on the other hand, it means to help Ukraine as well. And my prime minister is stating that we are not rich enough to invest into our military forces on one side, but also to help financially Ukraine on the other side. Bad, very bad. So this is the second sort of my worries. And the last one is my worry about the ability, our ability to adopt a very crucial and substantial decision to become independent in Europe on Russia, completely. Also in the area of energy. Independence, it doesn't mean that we resign on the trade, on the business with Russia. But independence in my head means that there is a choice. And Putin is master in playing with this card. Only in the moment when it is crystal clear that we want to be independent, we are able to pay for being independent by building new pipelines, striving for new resources, cooperating with US, supporting TTIP and some other projects. Only in this case, we can be really independent. So these three worries are the biggest in my head.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Ken, you have almost a final word here because we got to wrap up, but
Okay.
go ahead.
Well, the black swan for me, the real one is the Iranian nuclear program, but that's not a swan. That's a very visible...
It's a monster.
Monster, exactly. But the black swan on the international scene is one that concerned the Japanese folks, Japanese policymakers I met with, and their concern is the challenges China faces and the fact that China, because of the credit bubble, because of its current economic situation, and the fact that growth is really slowing down in China, housing bubble, nationality uprisings, the situation is getting tougher there. There's a danger that the current Chinese system could head into collapse. And now the regime is trying to avert this by a very aggressive scheme of intellectual property theft through cybersecurity, by bullying Western companies to sign deals with them against the threat of criminal charges, doing all it can to keep economic growth up. But that is a real challenge, and that would have major implications for the global supply chain, for Asia, and it's not clear where the PLA, where the Chinese military forces would come out in what could be a significant internal struggle in China that's not. It's a black swan. It's a possibility, but I think it's a real possibility. With regard to the Arab Spring, the mistakes that were so many, but it really began before the Arab Spring, and it began with a lack of confidence in the West, our unwillingness, particularly in the United States, to step up and back the Green Revolution in 2009 in Iran. That would have been a major first step. It would have averted the big monster that, or at least possibly slowed things down that a lot of us fear. From that, the cutback in democracy assistance, which was in Egypt in particular, certainly the president's decision to gamble with the Muslim Brotherhood and to trust Erdogan as his prime interlocutor on these questions was certainly not the most intelligent move. The withdrawal of U.S. Not getting a status of forces agreement with Iraq, going to Kurdistan, which I traveled to many times with our good friends from IRI, was a shining symbol of Western freedom in Iraq, stable, flourishing market economy, and that it finds itself under attack from ISIS, and Christian communities have fled, and the lack of resolve of Western leaders to defend the Christian communities of the Middle East goes on and on. So, but I hate to end on a depressing note. Let me just say, I think all of us, though, and on TTIP, let me note, as President Zorinda noted,
on TTIP, what's really critical is it opens the flow of natural gas from the United States to Europe. And the geostrategic dimensions of TTIP are huge. They're underappreciated. We failed to make the moral case for the Western Alliance and the need to do this. And we've left, as my colleague Benjamin Haddad of Hudson said earlier today, we've left the technocrats in charge of this. This is not a technocratic deal. There are much broader implications, and we need to make the moral case, the political case, and the case for Western unity.
Thank you, Ken. Well, we're only a few minutes away from the reception outside for all of you, where you will be able to continue this conversation, because this was obviously just the beginning of a debate or part of a debate, and we need to bring up this topic time and again. Well, our concluding remarks will come from Antonio López Istúriz White, who is a member of the European Parliament for the Spanish Partido Popular, who is the Secretary General of the European People's Party and the Secretary-Treasurer of the Wilfried Martens Center for European Studies. He has also closely worked with then Spanish Prime Minister José María Aznar. I would just like to make three short remarks. Two of them are on topics that we've been discussing. First of all, we are only a few weeks away from the launching of a major research paper called The Renaissance of the West. And it's deliberately provocative, in light of the BBC World News that I quoted. But I think it reflects the ultimately optimistic tone that we've had on this panel. And it certainly reflects the values that the Martens Center stands for. So that's one thing. That's coming up, and you will all receive an invitation for the launching event. Now, second, on TTIP, we figured that facts and numbers are one thing. The other thing is a narrative, is emotions. And unfortunately, we believe that in the current debate in Europe, the negative emotions have taken the upper hand. And we need to counter that. We need to offer an emotionally positive counter-narrative. And the Martens Center is doing this with an internet-based grassroots initiative where people can actually personally identify with a TTIP for growth and jobs, and where they also receive arguments for public debates. And, third, since I'm with an emotional narrative here, we're already close to poetry, aren't we? So let me conclude with the conclusion of the great American poet Walt Whitman, who concludes the only book he ever wrote in his life, but he wrote it he re-edited it 15 times or so, Leaves of Grass, and he concludes Leaves of Grass with two insights on the imaginative genius of the West when it worthily rises. First, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, first, that truly great poetry is always made by the people and for the people, and second, that the strongest and sweetest songs yet remain to be sung. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. The floor is yours, Tono López Istúriz White.
Thank you, Roland, very much. Good afternoon, everybody. First of all, I would like to thank the panelists, good friends, and Mark Green, thank you very much to be here in Brussels with us today. Jan and Miriam, I don't know where's Miriam, is here somewhere. I have to praise her work in the office. You know, I tried to steal her from you, but she remaining loyal. That's good, yeah. Ken Weinstein from the Hudson Institute, thank you also very much for your participation and your collaboration in this event. And of course, Roland, you did as always very good moderation and directing these panels. And of course, President of the Wilfried Martens Center, Nicola Dzurinda, good friend, former Prime Minister, and I will come back to that because we have to speak about some reformists that save some countries from the Russian grip, but that I will come now. I will be short because I'm always the one before the lunch, the dinner, or the cookies. So I'll try to be very short. I was asking Tommy, most of you know Tommy, he's Finnish. And they have politically, they have something that's always a problem, they tell you the truth. And whenever, I come, I say to Tommy, how is it going? And he has this very bad Finnish habit to tell me, if it's going very bad or well. And he's telling me that this occasion, he was very happy with how has been developed these 2 days of work. And it's a good promise also for our next meeting in Washington, whenever it's going to take place, June, July. And so I think we are in a good way. We have a lot of weird people out there that they don't like us. We have some enemies. It's not new. It's not new. While I was listening to some of these statements, and some I have been hearing around these days about Russia, the ISIS, Iran, China. Also inside, we have some people that I don't like. Our way of liberty, freedom, and security that we have in this European Union. They are now in the European Parliament. They have been voted. I have to take it democratically, and I will have to fight them democratically, and I will do. These are the extremists, extreme right, extreme left, anti-Europeans. Some of them, they are already telling me that they are bored in the European Parliament. That's good news that we are doing our work, because they came for the show. But now they are becoming in the parliamentarian routine, which is good. Those enemies remind me of the times of the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire failed at the end because the principles of the Republic, even during the times of the Empire, were kept. The moment they were abandoned, Rome failed. And it was not until the Renaissance times that again came that spirit that has led Europe to be a beacon also, that later on was translated to the United States, which has held the flag for us of freedom and liberty. And I have not to remind all of you what happened in the latest 60 years in this European Union, that what the United States did for us. So I would like to say that we are facing a new, and we should be working for a new renaissance in the West. People say the Russians. I said, the other day I had a conversation with the Russian ambassador to the United Nations, Vitaly Churkin. And I told him, thank you, after hearing 2 hours about his complaints about Ukraine and our attitude in Europe and so on. I told him, I said, excuse me, Ambassador, I have to congratulate you because you are doing more than anyone else to unite Europe in a foreign and defense policy. So thank you. And he was very pissed off with me, but okay. It's not the Russians. There are some oligarchs there that they don't want what's going on in Europe. And they're pushing, even Putin wants to be pushed, to create this atmosphere. Money is flowing, buying politicians, buying voluntarily, volunteers, people around. I've seen this in many countries. They tell me about Moldavia, about Belarus, and they tell me about, no, even inside the European Union. We have to be very careful because we are an open system. And we cannot close it. This is what they want. The ISIS, they use religion as an excuse to end with a system they don't like, of liberty. The wrong interpretation of the Quran. And they use it because they want to finish with this and what the way of living we are living today. Iran, it's out of the question, Ken. You put it. I share absolutely one of my biggest concerns is the nuclear program of Iran, for me. And China, well, okay. My main concern is that I have to deal with the ones that are inside Europe. Now I've seen these graffitis. I don't know if you have already been seeing this. No to TTIP. You start to see this in some walls in some European capitals. And I said, but who the hell knows what TTIP means outside these rooms? So the campaign is already starting. Money is flowing, and the campaign is already starting against TTIP because it's also a danger for them. They don't like it. Free trade. Ooh, they hate this. And they are already doing their campaign. And you can feel it in the European Parliament. Now a change of mood in some, I will not say the left, just in some part of the Parliament you can begin to feel the growing concern of some groups about the TTIP. We have to be leaders, because what there is, and it has been spoken in these meetings, we have been spoken about the last 3 years, there is a lack of leadership. No one wants to take it. We are in the politically correct thing. Yeah, I'm not going to mention any president that was already mentioned, but everybody's friendly, everybody's happy, no, excuse me, no, sir. There are people that they don't like you. They don't like me, and they will do everything to take out us of the equation by any means. That's why now we are confronted with what's going on in Syria. I had the opportunity the other day in a very intense discussion, in a very reserved meeting in Abu Dhabi. General Allen was there, General Petraeus, both of them in the same place. And I had the privilege to share a little bit about what's going on. And I was a little bit negative about developments of things. 1,700 groups fighting against Assad. We only have contacts with 75 out of them. And the rest, they believe, also even the 75, they are suspicious of us because we throw the bombs. And they feel that we are helping Assad with the bombs, so it's a mess. And no one knows how to drive this. The old communist regimes in Europe that were finished in '89, still the wall is still breaking. Because there's still some people inside, all communists, that they want to return to the old happy old times. Sorry to say that, Nicolas, it's what they say. You just have to go, for those who had the incredible luck to be living in another reality. It is hard still today to go to some of your countries and see what was the desperation and the tragedy created by this nightmare of communism in the past. Still there are people here, still they say that there was happy times. But people like you, Nicolas, you have saved your country. Those who took the reforms have saved your countries from the grip of these oligarchs that are acting through political channels. Others, they didn't, and now they are quite in a shake momentum. I'm not going to speak about any particular country, but you know what's going on with the pipelines today. So it's a very, very difficult situation. Difficult times, people that now we admired in the past, that took that leadership. It is my belief, because I have hope, because I'm a politician, I have to be always positive, but I know that here is breathing in the political panorama in the United States and Europe. Now they're breathing people that they will take soon this leadership. Because we are facing these challenges. Our people are not aware in the streets. I always tell in the European campaign, I was telling people, they come to me and said, Isturiz, what is the European Union about? And so on, excuse me. These Europeans, no, excuse me, we live in Europe. I have to say that. Said, no, because, Europe, Brussels is guilty and so on. Said, but why then are so many thousands of people, they want to come to Europe to live? Are they all crazy? And then I become serious. People are dying in the Mediterranean Sea. By the way, I want to make this remark because I'm fighting for the rights of many children in the European Parliament. It was 3 weeks ago, 80 children died in the waters of the Mediterranean, crossing to come to Europe. Why? Because we live in a space of freedom and security. It might be the case that we are the only ones that we don't know that we are living it. But I'm telling you, many people outside, they know. Many of them, they want to come. Many of them want to copy our model, and we should help them in that. And many others, they want to fight us. We have to fight back, and to create this renaissance and to make clear that we are going to stand for our principles, because I don't want anyone to dictate me anything. I want to freely take the steps for me, my family, and for everybody in the future with absolute liberty. That's what we are here for. We believe in. Many of you I know already, maybe in the audience, most of you. And the effort starts these times of difficulty. Thank you very much for taking, in many of your cases, your time to be with us these 2 days. Congratulations, as always, in this case, to the 3 organizations, Martin Center, the Republican Institute, and the Hudson Institute, for their help and collaboration. And we hope we will see many of you in Washington at that time, and I will be closing before the dinner or whatever. Thank you very much, and see you there.